Hi, my name is Kate Mitchell, and I'm a psychology major minoring in criminal justice and anthropology. I chose the topic of global poverty and inequality because it is a relatively new issue in global politics, and I think it's a huge problem that such poverty continues to exist amidst extreme and growing wealth. In this presentation, I will examine global poverty and inequality, potential causes, the consequences of such divide, and then propose some possible solutions to the problem. When it comes to examining the problem of global poverty, it is important to point out that the top 1% of the world's richest people control 48% of the world's total wealth. In terms of size, this means that the richest 80 people in the world control as much wealth as the poorest half of the world's population. Now, inequality has always existed in societies and is not inevitably a major problem, especially when an economy is growing and there are opportunities for people to move upward in terms of wealth. The problem is that in the last few decades, we have seen what researchers call the gap widening between the rich and the poor. This means that the amount of wealth separating the two groups is extremely large, and the millionaires and billionaires are getting richer while the poor are getting poorer. So essentially, while an elite few are living luxuriously, many others can't even obtain basic human necessities like food, clean water, and shelter. Poverty is the clearest display of global and domestic inequality. Poverty is very apparent in developing countries where some people live on less than $1.25 a day, known as absolute poverty. And although those types of extreme poverty have declined over the years, poverty is becoming more and more common overall, even in the richest places like the United States. Despite there being different definitions or categories of poverty, all poverty is characterized by 6 particular dimensions. These dimensions of poverty are hunger, psychological dimensions, such as a sense of powerlessness or shame, inadequate infrastructure, such as a lack of access to things like roads, electricity, and transportation, low levels of literacy, health problems, and inadequate income. Since poverty is the state for the majority of the world's people and nations, it is important to ask, why is this? Why are so many people in poverty? It cannot simply be that all of these people are lazy or totally responsible for the situations that they are in. It is important to examine some of the root causes of poverty. These are government policies, colonialism, geography and natural disasters, and population growth, just to name a few. It is especially important to look at these people's governments. Typically, these governments are not pursuing policies that promote successful development, and it is in these deeper and more global causes of poverty that are often less discussed. Behind the interconnectedness that comes from globalization are global decisions and policies. These are typically influenced and formed by the rich and powerful. These can be leaders of rich countries or other global actors such as corporations, institutions, and influential people. So in the face of such influence, the governments of poor nations and their people are often powerless, and as a result, a few get richer while the poor remain poor. Some people say that colonialism is another cause of poverty. People argue that European colonization of lands like Africa and Asia laid the foundation for economic discrepancies between rich and poor countries many, many years ago. The areas that grew rich hundreds of years ago are generally still well off in terms of wealth even today. Some people say that poor countries have geographic characteristics that prevent them from having a thriving economy. For example, those by bodies of water are typically more well off in terms of economy because of easy transportation of goods in comparison to those countries that are located far from global markets. In addition, in places where natural disasters like flooding, volcanic eruptions, and earthquakes occur, they typically destroy the economy, create infrastructure problems, and many people must relocate, all leading to greater impoverishment in the area. Population growth is also said to play a role in poverty. Since the 1950s, we have seen a much larger population growth in poor countries over the years than in more industrialized countries. When inequality is this prevalent, this then creates a broad difference in values and attitudes. This explains why the conflict between the rich and the poor is now one of the greatest sources of tension in American society. Persistent inequality and poverty leads to people challenging the legitimacy of economic, political, and social institutions. It makes equal opportunity and upward mobility seem impossible. and extreme inequality is harmful to economic growth. For example, in democratic countries, it discourages the political participation of poor people. If poor people are not voting for people that support policies that would benefit them, this reduces their access to important things like education and healthcare. Not only is this bad for the people themselves, but it is also bad for economic growth and development. In addition, this kind of gap promotes hopelessness among the poor and can create negative attitudes towards the democracy. This means that they don't trust that the system has their best interests in mind and keeps them from wanting to help with the finding of possible solutions to the problem. This allows for the rich to then vote for policies that benefit them and also leads to a potential for corruption. Basically, the effects of inequality come together to ensure that the poor will remain poor, creating a destructive cycle of poverty. It is also important to add that things such as terrorism and global crime are widely linked to poverty. Since poverty has so many negative consequences, it is important that we look at possible solutions to this major problem. Some solutions include better education and family planning, government policies and reduction of corruption, improvement of agriculture, and even volunteering. Since being well educated affects the way that people think and encourages problem solving and creativity, it's crucial in alleviating poverty. It is important to note that women and children are most affected by poverty. It is important that women are educated and participate in economic, political, and social life. In addition, family planning and education for women has an influence on the number of children a woman has and their quality of life. Countries that prioritize education and family planning seem to have healthier citizens and better economy than countries that don't. Another solution is to make efforts to reduce corruption. The poorest countries in the world are also the most corrupt. It makes citizens cynical, which decreases efforts to achieve equality and economic development. The corrupt must be punished and held accountable. Although this is easier said than done, a start can be made by allowing freedom of press and access to information. Another very important possible solution is agriculture. Improving agriculture would allow poor communities to produce food to prevent malnutrition and increase productivity overall. Lastly, it is important to take the civic duty to volunteer to help the poor, even in small ways like helping in soup kitchens or in homeless shelters. Although inequality will always exist in some form due to location, personal abilities, and opportunities, these efforts would be a great start to closing the large gap between the rich and the poor and essentially making the world a better place for everyone to live in.